Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I know I said I was going to try and make monthly videos back in September, but it just stuff got crazy from there. I just had family issues and that sort, and I was working on something for the longest time, but and I do mean longest. I think I was about 10,000 words deep when I just realized that idea wasn't going to pan out. And so started working on something else. I may go back to that project at some point, but in the meantime, I saw this really bad thread on Twitter, and I just wanted to do a read through pretty quickly. Well, not really quickly because it's like 60 entries deep, but I just wanted to put out something and just kind of give my thoughts on this because I'm not going to respond to this on my Twitter page. It's just way too much work. But if you do want to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at AnalogTeak. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not a very good Twitter page, but it is there. So, anyway, as you can see, this is Simple Writing Tips, a thread by one Lillian Orchard, and to be quite honest, I had no idea who this was. The name sounded familiar, but I wasn't personally familiar with the channel. So I went on YouTube, and you'd think I would agree with this person on everything because their two most popular videos are about why both The Legend of Korra and Steven Universe are garbage, and here's why. Um, so it looks like they have good takes. I mean, except they do appear to be a My Little Pony fan, and you know, I was a My Little Pony fan, so I know how bad these people are. Comedy and pretentious think pieces, so a bit of self awareness there. Checked out their Twitter profile. We got she her. That's a bad sign already. I yell about cartoons for a living, which, fair enough. Again, bit of self awareness. I appreciate it. And then this part is what really confused me. Get pedophiles and fascists out of children's media 2021. I don't know why we can't do that now in the year of our Lord 2020. That seems like a more efficient policy than waiting until next year. But just, it's just one of those things you read and you're like, this is a very self-important individual. They clearly have an overblown view of how much power they have on this earth. But anyway, so I just wanted to do a quick read through of this, these writing tips because I myself am an aspiring author. I do a bit of writing in my spare time, and I could use some writing tips from whoever this person is. I don't know if she has any books or anything of the sort, but we'll take a listen. Or I won't actually listen to her advice, but I'll read it. So first we've got tip number 1, don't worry about spoilers. If your story is good, spoilers aren't going to make it any less enjoyable. If spoilers make a story less enjoyable, that just means you are relying on cheap shock value as a shortcut. Okay, so I was on board for one sentence. Don't worry about spoilers. Even that's a bit shaky, because, yeah, I'm gonna worry about spoilers for my story. The whole point is, I want to really hit people with that, I mean, it's like if I tell you that Rosebud is the sled, it kind of it does kind of ruin that excitement for you. I I honestly can't remember how old I was when I saw The Sixth Sense, but I want to say I did know the ending, and I'm not gonna lie, it was like oh man, like you go into it and you just kind of you don't get that satisfaction of ooh. That's a very different experience from having watched it and then watching it again. Because when you watch it again, you have this appreciation for the twist, but when you go into it knowing it, you kind of have this cynical view of like, yes, I get it, he's been dead the whole time, blah blah blah, get on with it. And so yeah, spoilers can make a story less enjoyable. But what I really don't like is this if then statement where if spoilers make a less story enjoyable, then you were just relying on cheap shock value as a shortcut, which isn't true at all. I mean, you can have reveals that are good, and I don't even want to try and think of examples because that's just such a self-evident thing. Like, you can have good reveals in stories that aren't dependent on the fact that they are reveals. It's just a nonsensical statement, honestly. But I don't want to give too much time to any one of these. So Number two, the middle point of a story is the best time to get a main couple together. Are you working on a 5-season show? Put your main couple halfway through season 3. The finale is the worst time because we don't get any time to enjoy the payoff. That's also a. Here's the thing. This is writing tips, and she said the middle point of a story, which could honestly mean anything. All right, and even here we can tell she's not talking just about books, because she's written "Are you working on a 5-season show?" which kind of, as somebody who apparently talks about a lot of cartoons, mainly very popular ones of the like mid 2010s, but the point is as somebody who speaks about shows, you should know a lot of shows don't know how many seasons they're getting. Especially, I think the CW is actually really bad with this, where they never know how long their shows are going to go on, so they're just in this constant state of uh, maintaining somewhat of a status quo, where they can't have any major changes because they don't know if they're going to be able to develop them or do anything really special with whatever they're doing. The point is, though, is this is we'll get into this later, but for right now, I mean, you read writing tips. This is all very definitive language, all right? So for now, we're going to read through it with that lens of this is very definitive because, that's what's being presented to me here. As somebody who is an aspiring author, I would expect this to be definitive statements. And they are very definitive. Uh, like, again, with part one, we have an if-then statement, and insulting the writer with this last bit here, relying on cheap shock value. So you read this, and then it says the middle point of the story is the best time. It is the best time. All right, like there's no if, fans, or buts about it. Like that, just the middle point. That's when when the characters have to get together, which is also nonsensical because again, this isn't just referring to books. It's not just referring to shows. This is also referring to movies, and it's just we also have to define what do you mean getting the main couple together. I believe in The Princess Bride it is about halfway through the film where Buttercup realizes that the Dread Pirate Roberts is Wesley, and they don't, quote unquote, get together until the end of the film. Same thing for Star Wars, actually, is, Han Solo, Princess Leia, they profess their love for each other at like the end of Empire Strikes Back, which is technically halfway through the story. It happens in the second movie in the trilogy. But then, they're kind of shaky through Return of the Jedi, where, she still says she loves him, but there's all that stuff with he's not sure what her relationship with Luke is. It's a whole mess. So you could argue they're not together until the end of the story, and it's just it really irks me because you're handing out this advice which is going to lead a lot of people astray. Again, very definitive language being used here. As a matter of fact, we can see how definitive this is when we move on to tip 3. Friends to lovers is better than enemies to lovers every time, which that's just a preference. Like, that's just flat out a preference. I guarantee there have been stories where people who were enemies became romantically involved, and it was better than if they had gotten involved with their friend. I kind of don't even want to justify this with an example, not just because it's really hard trying to think of actual enemies to lovers examples in media, but also because it's just such a self-explanatory, like you can't just say one thing is always better than another thing. It all depends on the circumstances of the characters, obviously, and also whoever's writing it, which is so yeah, just you can't just say one thing is always better than another thing. It's a very, well, I don't want to say stupid, but she's also not ignorant, because how long has she been talking about story writing? Okay, well, it's been years, all right. At the very least, it's been years. Going by these things, very long videos about why stories are bad, you know storytelling, or at least you should. So I can't call this ignorance, but it is silly. We'll leave it at that. Moving on to number 4, victims of abuse moving away from the negative impacts of their abuse and becoming healthier are not redemption arcs, and she lists Zuko as an example. This one is strange because it's not a writing tip. It's something you would say to somebody else in an online conversation about Zuko, which, by the way, he absolutely has a redemption arc. He was a bad person, and he became a better person. That's, by definition, redemption. Whether or not he's an abused child, which, I mean, he definitely is. His father definitely physically abused him. But that doesn't make it not a redemption arc. And I think he would agree that he needed to be redeemed. I think the character of Zuko, as an older, wiser person, would say, yes, I was a bad person, and I can say myself, I've done bad things as a child and I knew that it was wrong, but I did it anyway. I'm not going to blame that on, I was just a kid who didn't know any better, because no. And Zuko himself did know better. But honestly, this would just be a weird statement, regardless of if she had mentioned Zuko or not. But it really has nothing to do with writing. It has to do with the terminology used to discuss writing. So I don't know. It's just a strange one. Number 5 is heroes refusing to kill villains who have shown to be actively trying to murder people isn't noble, it's enabling. It again, here we have one that isn't writing advice, it's talking to fans of things. It's been a discussion within the comics community for years that, yeah, Batman probably should kill the Joker because he escapes every time and kills 100 people before he gets locked up again. In which case, we really should be talking about the criminal justice system in Gotham, not Batman, because to be quite honest, Batman has no obligation to stop these people. Even if you want to go by Spider-Man rules, Batman, or Bruce Wayne didn't always have this great power. He chose to fix Gotham as Batman of his own free will. He had no obligation to do so. And so to demand that, yes, he should kill Joker is a bit silly, because that's not his job. All he does is all Batman does is make sure that these people face the criminal justice system. He doesn't deal out punishment. He just brings them to their accusers. And again, this has nothing to do with writing. It has to do with the discussion surrounding writing. So I don't see how a vigilante killing someone would be more noble, and that speaks to a very dangerous mindset of, yes, people with the most power should dole out punishment, whether or not they have that authority. Just a very it's a very dangerous mindset, and it has nothing to do with writing. Here's one that I actually mostly agree with. Number 6, 2 women kissing in the last episode of a show after 4 or 5 seasons of trying to murder each other isn't revolutionary, it's fetishized abuse and violence. Like I said, first sentence I'm mostly on board with. I don't know what she's actually referring to with the 4 to 5 seasons of trying to murder each other. I know, of course, that we have this Legend of Korra video to refer to, and that she's probably not okay with the ending of that show. But they weren't trying to murder each other. I honestly have no idea what she's legitimately referring to here, but I would agree with that. Yes, 2 women kissing each other in the last episode of a show isn't revolutionary. That's a fairly obvious statement. What I don't understand is the second part of this. I legitimately don't get it. It has nothing to do with abuse and violence, let alone the fetishization of either of those things. She's just talking about dangerous women in general who are, violent, who are murderers, but they're also physically attractive. That's just a thing in media. for years, audiences have really liked that kind of, ooh, you know, she's dangerous kind of thing. I don't know. I don't honestly get it myself, but to label it as this morally reprehensible thing is taking it a bit too far. Then we have number 7 here. Twitter is not an appropriate place to reveal story details. The appropriate place is in the work itself. And I have no idea what she means by story details. You know, I would agree. It's been a, you know, I would agree it's been a very hard part of discussing Star Wars these past few years, because every time you bring up, you know, a plot hole or just the way something doesn't work mechanically, people will counter with, oh, well, in this book, and it's nonsense. It's like, that's not what was presented, you know, and it's nonsense because that's not what was presented in the actual movie, so I can't take it seriously whatsoever when you come to me with, you know, this in this coloring book made for 8-year-olds that you should definitely have read because, you know, you're a Star Wars fan, aren't you? It actually explains why the bombers are, you know, bad ships. So yeah, I would agree with that one, from the way I'm interpreting it. Again, I don't really know what is meant by that. This one is just stupid. I'm gonna be honest, this one's just dumb. Number 8. When a character's body count is over 10,000 innocent lives, then that character is no longer redeemable, which is just false, okay? Number 1, Darth Vader, alright? Darth Vader definitely was, at the very least, complicit in the deaths of over 10,000 people. Maybe he didn't directly kill that many, but, you know, there were definitely, you know, he slaughtered the younglings, he killed Mace Windu, or helped to kill Mace Windu, but there were definitely a lot of people that died by his hand, and he was still redeemed. But again, you've definitively stated, no, they're not redeemable, which is, honestly, that's your opinion. You can't just tell me that someone is not redeemable, because I do believe at the end of his life, Darth Vader felt he had done something wrong. I do believe there was a deep repentance there, because, you know, it was shown to me on screen and it was believable even after watching the prequels. This one is just nonsense, because it also implies, like, oh yeah, 1,000 innocent lives, they're definitely redeemable, and at that point there's kind of like a curve, you know, on a graph where it reaches a point where I'm like, really, what is the difference between 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000 people as far as, like, you know, a body count, you know, of innocent lives goes? Like, just functionally tell me the difference of 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000, because this also implies, like, 9,999. You know, it's looking a bit dicey, but you're still redeemable, you know, technically. But once you hit, you know, once you hit 10,001, it's like, definitely no, that's the cutoff, man. I'm sorry, you're nope, no redemption for you. Which, it's just nonsense. And again, just the definitive language of this is how it is a horrible mindset for a writer to have. Then we move on to tip number 9, which relates to tip number 8. It says, tip number 8 does not apply to characters for whom making them a villain was a stupid, idiotic idea. For example, this character, I don't know who Sylvanas Windrunner is, says at that point, it's just character it says at that point, it's just character rerailment. This, okay, so this is just, okay, so a writer is never going to look at their own ideas as if they were stupid and idiotic, unless it's something they did, you know, several years ago and they've grown as a writer since then. But if I make a character a villain, I'm not going to be like, oh, that was a stupid, idiotic idea the next chapter, you know? I honestly don't know what they're talking about here, because I don't know who this character is. I can't think of many times where a character did, you know, a heel face turn, killed 10,000 people, and then was redeemed. Usually characters get one turn, you know. I know in Arrow there was the little sister character, but she basically started out as neutral. She wasn't a hero or a villain. Then her biological father started training her as like a member of the League of Assassins or something, and that kind of made her, a bit on the supervillain side. And then she was, redeemed and made into a hero. But that wasn't even really a redemption arc. That was just an arc. It wasn't all about like, oh, I'm gonna reach out to her and make her see the light. It wasn't anything like that. It was just that's the arc she went through. And again, that was neutral to villain to hero. I can't think of a time where somebody went from like Gandhi to Hitler. I can't think of a time where somebody went from Gandhi to Hitler in like 3 seconds and then they were redeemed over the course of the season. But again, just the whole you cannot do this is just a bad thing to say. Then we have number 10. Everything in a story is there because the creator wished it to be there. Trying to explain away bigoted story decisions using world building is a fallacy because you put it there to begin with. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. What is a bigoted story decision? Okay? If you're talking about having bigotry in your story, a lot of stories need that to function, especially ones that are trying to say something meaningful about, racism or classism, or even sexism. That's just a very. I'm actually going to go into the replies on this one because I have no idea what she's talking about. Um, yeah, it looks like in here there's not a whole lot of people who know what she's talking about either. Yeah, I'm not seeing a single definition. Okay, this one looks to be agreeing with her. Oh, in this setting, demons possess women and you have to hit them to get the demons out. So it's not real. Okay, so what's wrong with having a story where, these creatures possess a woman and you have to hit the woman to get the creature out? Like what's actually the problem with that? That could even be really interesting. You could have characters who absolutely will not hit a woman who are forced into it, and maybe they feel bad about that, and there's a story about that. Right underneath there, we have a good point of if I want to write a racist character as a cautionary tale of racism, does that mean I'm racist? Which that is they even bring it up themselves. That is a legitimate argument people use against To Kill a Mockingbird. This was about my reaction. Yeah, I'm not seeing a definition for bigoted story decisions. I don't know what that means. Then we have number 11. Don't pair adults with minors. That's pedophilia. So first off, it's not. I know I'm gonna sound like one of those Reddit guys, one of the Reddit lib right, but pedophilia has a very specific definition, and to use it to refer to anything but what it actually means demeans how horrible pedophilia is. And then we have, I believe, the way this reads. I'm not gonna lie, I am majoring in English, and I'm reading, "Don't pair adults with minors. That's pedophilia." So that's pedophilia has to be referring to this action. So they are saying that pairing adults with a minor, they are saying that pairing an adult with a minor is pedophilia, which, okay. So there are varying circumstances, especially if people from different countries, where some people may view it as okay for a 21-year-old to be in a relationship with a 17-year-old. Other people may not. Regardless, those are things that happen in real life. Okay? There are 16-year-olds that date 25-year-olds in real life. I'm not saying it's okay, because honestly, I don't think it is, but that is a thing that happens in real life. And if it happens in real life, I believe it's okay to portray it in your story. It depends on whether or not the story glorifies this relationship, but you've just said don't do it, which is just mind-numbingly stupid. I'm sorry. That's ugh. I mean, you just read this. She's actively calling. If you have an adult character dating a character under the age of 18 in your story, regardless of how it's portrayed, you are a pedophile. That's what she's just said. Um, and I'm trying to steelman this point, but that's just how it reads. You've just called these people pedophiles for deciding to write a certain circumstance into their story. Number 12, don't sexualize teenage characters. I would agree with that, but I would hesitate to agree with that because I don't know what she means by that. For instance, Spider-Man, his outfit conforms to his body shape, and if there's a shot of him from behind, is that quote unquote sexualizing a teenage character? So I would agree with this one, but I don't know what she means. So okay, that it's not honestly a big point of contention, but we can move on to 13. Don't make up weird anime excuses for sexualizing teenage characters. Okay, whatever, sure. But one thing, if a character is 1,000 years old, that makes them not a teenager. So yeah. Also, are you? I see her mentioning the age of consent here, and the age of consent in most states in the U.S. Actually, not really, but the widely accepted age of consent in the U.S. is 18, which is a teenager. So I would honestly wonder if she's okay with quote unquote sexualizing 19-year-olds. That would actually be an interesting conversation because you've just said teenager. You didn't say minors. You said teenager. So who knows what you mean? But yeah, if a character is 1,000, they are definitively not a teenager. So do you mean a character that looks like a teenager? Because, again, this is more referring to discussions surrounding media, not the writers of media itself. Then we have number 14, making a metaphor for a gay, trans, making a metaphor for gay, trans, or asexual representation is always inherently inferior to just making a gay, trans, or asexual character. I disagree, because quite often there are people who will not watch your story if you have certain people in that story. There are people who just are not interested in that conversation. But if you have a metaphor for it, for instance, an asexual character, maybe if they were a robot or I don't know. I don't know how asexual people think or feel, or if they do. But oftentimes you have these people who will not be interested in your story if it outright has certain elements in it. And you can argue, well, then this story isn't for them. Well, then that story isn't for them. But there are people who want to reach out to these people, and so maybe they'll make metaphors for that. We also have the case of the same thing could be said. I could just as easily say making a metaphor for racial inequality is always inherently inferior to just making, to just having racial inequality in your story. In which case, that's not going to be a children's movie at that point. And, I think a lot of kids would rather watch Zootopia than To Kill a Mockingbird. So, if you want to reach a certain demographic of people who are not going to be interested in your social commentary, it's best to have a metaphor for that social commentary so that they can understand it better. For instance, there is a Dr. Seuss book about racism. There is a Dr. Seuss book about deforestation. These were metaphors that he used to reach children and to teach them about these important concepts. And I guarantee you, if it had been about actual racism and actual deforestation, children would not have been interested. So this falls apart just on the children angle, which, again, you talk about cartoons for a living. I think you should understand that. Then going on to 15, if there are humans in your story, restricting gay, trans, asexual representation to the non-human characters makes you a huge turd, which is just very childish. Also, sure, I honestly don't care. I can't really relate to this one, but I guess I don't disagree with it. Then we have number 16. If the only gay man in your work is a foppish diva, you're a huge turd. I really hate the use of childish language when you're trying to make what I assume you think is an important point about, social justice. But here's the thing. You can write your story however you want. So, honestly, a lot of these are just saying if you have stereotypes in your story, you're a bad person, um, which is just so frustrating. You can write your story however you want, and these just completely these just completely remove these scenarios out of any context, which is just unfair. For instance, if your only non-binary character is a non-human shapeshifter, you're a huge turd, which is okay. Honestly, how many non-binary characters am I going to have in my story? It's never really going to come up, honestly. Just like it doesn't in real life if you stay off of Twitter. But again, here we have this could be a metaphor. And if you think this is an important concept for children to learn, which I imagine you do, you would want them to have a metaphor to understand this, because children aren't going to be like, oh yeah, that's a non-binary. We have to use they, them pronouns. They're not going to understand that. That's children, as many people on Twitter post like, oh, my 5-year-old was mourning the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Children aren't actually that socially conscious. So if you want to teach children these concepts, which again, I imagine you do, you would want to use a metaphor. Here we have, if your only autistic character is an ethically challenged number fetishist, you're a huge turd, which, again, you can write your story however you want. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the autist savant trope, but it's a trope for a reason, because there are people in real life who are really good with numbers who happen to be autistic. And so if you're going to have an autistic character in your story, why not? Then we have, if your only black character is a volatile, hyper angry brute, you're a huge turd, which the only actual example I can think of for this would be Alpha's, where his whole thing is that the only way he can use his super strength is by like manually boosting his adrenaline or something, which can cause him to have anger issues. But I mean, it's whatever. It's honestly, it's not a big deal. It's not a black thing. It's the fact that he's a big guy with super strength. Then we have, if you're only black woman if the only black woman in your cast barely gets any screen time except to be fetishized or fits Rule 20, you're a huge turd. Again, what would you mean by fetishized? Because I think Vixen from the Justice League animated cartoon is a strong character, but maybe you look at her outfit and you say, oh, she's just there to be sexualized, when you were actually the one demeaning her character and not me. So, okay, Then we have, okay, a lot of these are just saying blah, 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 blah. If you force a woman to kiss her abuser, you're a huge turd. Okay, again, there are things that happen in real life. One of those is rape. That is a thing that happens in real life. You are not necessarily a bad person for writing that into your story, which is just, taking 23 even farther. Again, you're not a bad person for presenting things that happen in real life in fiction. If you sideline every non-white character in your cast to focus on a white boy with anger issues and a tendency towards hostility getting a redemption arc, what is the problem with that, though? So let's say this is a TV show which routinely has episodes that focus on one character. What would be the problem with sidelining not every non-white character, but what would be the problem with sidelining every character to have this, white boy with anger issues focus on himself for an episode? What would be the problem with that? Yeah, I'm focusing on one character. Who's to say that there's not an episode of this hypothetical show where the same thing happens for a black guy or an Indian guy or an Asian woman, It's just, again, this is the mindset this is what this mindset leads to, where it's just everything is about race. Everything is about, sexuality and identity. It can't just be a story, and here's an episode of this show focusing on this one aspect. It's about the white guy now. I see how it is. It's feigning offense, honestly. It's just, I want to be angry about something. So if you focus on a white character, that upsets me. It's ridiculous. And in all honesty, it's just completely ridiculous. Okay, this one is just silly. Characters don't have sexual agency. You made them that way as a justification. So I need to actually read up on this, but I'm fairly sure that two of the most, well, not two of the most, but two of the most famous, uh, very sexualized characters in recent years are Bayonetta and 2B. You know, those are very popular ones at the moment. And I'm fairly certain a woman had something to do with their design. Let me actually look into that real quickly. Oh, okay. So, Mari Shimazaki, who designed Bayonetta, is actually a woman. I can't find like a solid Wikipedia page on her, but it also looks like she worked on a costume for Ivy, which is really funny because I didn't actually know that. Oh, I'm sorry. This was just really funny to me because I didn't actually know about this before I started recording. Apparently, this design is by a woman. Yeah, this design was made by a woman, and it's more common than you. It's more common than you might think, especially in video games, that characters who dress like this are often designed by women. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm fairly sure 2B was designed by a man. But to be quite honest, you don't have to justify your armor design or clothing designs at all. You can draw a character any way you want to. And, little known fact, I know this may come as a surprise to you, but there are women out there that like looking at attractive women. I know it's a horrible thing to learn. In this day and age, in the year of our Lord 2020, it's an insane thing to think about. But it's not just men that like looking at attractive women, or and I'm not even personally a fan of either of those series, but just telling people what they can and cannot draw is ridiculous. And again, most men won't use the excuse of characters having sexual agency. They'll just say, oh yeah, I wanted to draw them that way. The ones that will say that are women, who I do believe have that authority. Oh, and they actually, she actually references this. Related to the above, if the justification is to be honest and say you like ogling sexy characters, you're still a huge turd. Um, she does admit like slightly less of a turd, slightly, but no, I honestly think that's a lot better to just be like, oh yeah, no, I like looking at hot women. I mean, why do we have to pretend that people don't like looking at hot women? Why do we have to pretend that? Yes, okay, I I do a bit of drawing myself, all right? And there are times where I draw characters that I would consider to be conventionally attractive. Why do I do that? Because I like attractive people. Sorry. Hashtag sorry, not sorry, but, you know, I'm going to draw things I like looking at. I don't know why I wouldn't. I mean, what would be the problem? I mean, honestly, what is the problem with specifically, oh, I drew a woman in a bikini because I like looking at women in bikinis? What is fundamentally the difference between that and I drew a portrait of my wife because she's beautiful? I mean, to be fair, one is a lot classier than the other, but it's functionally the same thing. Why would I draw something I don't like looking at? Unless, of course, it's meant to elicit that reaction from the viewer, but more often than not, people draw things, or really create things, that they like to experience. I'm not going to program a game that I wouldn't find fun. I'm not going to make a YouTube video that I myself wouldn't watch. I'm not going to play a song that I don't like. It's just, it's just a ridiculous mindset to have. 27. Don't worry about not having everything planned out beforehand. No writer or creator plans everything out beforehand, and the ones who say they do are filthy liars. Writers, okay, this is projection. This is crazy projection. Writers have at best 1 to 2 story beats they're determined to include. Everything else is by the seat of their pants. No! No, you are wrong. You are wrong. Why don't you want people to be good writers? That's what I would ask. Why do you not want people to be good writers? That's insane. That is insane to just say, no, guys, don't plan things. I mean, it's not even. It's not saying don't plan things, but it's saying, well, no one plans things, so don't worry about it. No, absolutely worry about it. If you want to have a really good story, especially, again, we're just talking about stories, so this could also refer to one book, not a series. So even if you're just writing one book, I mean, especially if I'm just writing one book, a single novel, has nothing to do with any series, this is going to stand on its own, I need to know where it starts, where it ends, and I need to know how we get from point A to point B in between all of that, from A to C to, to. Sorry. I'm so angry about this one that I'm getting my letters confused. I need to know how to get from point A to point B to point C to point D until we get to the end. That is basic. That is very basic, okay? Any successful author will tell you that you need to know where you're going before you start. You can't just start. You can't just do everything by the seat of your pants. And it would honestly surprise me if this woman ever had a bestseller. If this woman ever had a successful novel, because that is ridiculous thinking. That is shameful. You know what? That is shameful to just be so willfully lazy as to say. I mean, this is a pro tip for in your life. When somebody says, "Oh, everyone does this thing," what they really mean is, I do this thing, and I'm trying to convince myself that it's okay. Like, have you ever met those people who say, "Oh, everyone cheats once or twice in their life," and you kind of die a little inside because you start thinking maybe that's true, but it's not. No, people don't, cheat once or twice in their life, and that makes it okay for me to do it. No, that's it is not okay. This is I have to move on from this one. That made me really actually mad. Like actually mad. Okay. Number 28. Don't try and do what Avatar did. You can't. Even the people who made Avatar can't make another show do what Avatar did. This is false. Okay, I actually know this one. It wasn't Mike and Brian who made Avatar The Last Airbender great. It was Aaron Ahaz, who didn't work on The Legend of Korra, and that is fundamentally why I believe The Legend of Korra is awful. Well, that's not why I believe Legend of Korra is awful, but that's why that is what I believe made The Legend of Korra awful, was that Aaron Ahaz didn't work on it. Um, Also, I want to know what you mean by do what Avatar did. Do you mean I want to know where my show is going? Does that relate to point 27, that awful, awful point you made? Or does it mean don't try to elevate children's media? In which case, that's an awful thing to say because we should be elevating children's media. Um, you know, for it seems like nowadays, it's either Teen Titans Go or Game of Thrones. There's no in between for slightly more mature children. Honestly, I don't know what doing what Avatar did means, and I would like to know the definition of that. But absolutely, aspire to be the best at what you're trying to do. I mean, if you don't, what's even the point? If you don't want to be the best, why even try? Personally, I know I'm not going to be the best, but I'll still strive to be, All right, then we have number 29 that says low stakes interpersonal conflict will always be more satisfying in the long run than high stakes saving the world. Friends is more popular than your favorite anime for a reason. Ugh. Ugh. What do you. Oh. What does that mean? First off, I guarantee that more people have watched Dragon Ball Z than Friends. Also, are we really holding Friends up as the pinnacle of writing? Well, admittedly, I've only ever watched Friends on break time at this grocery store I used to work to because the teenage girls that worked there would always change the channel to Friends. But from what I saw, it was awful. And not just in terms of storytelling, because I mean, it's a sitcom, but it wasn't even funny. But I mean, seriously, it's just, ugh. What do you mean by that? Okay, ignoring that last sentence, low stakes interpersonal conflict will always, that is a very bad thing to say as a writer, will always be more satisfying in the long run than high stakes saving the world. Okay, so again, going back to Avatar The Last Airbender, it all builds up to saving the world. I would agree. Not, every week of your show shouldn't be about saving the world. There should be little, interpersonal conflict in there. Yes, absolutely. But again, the whole will always, it is this way, is a terrible mindset to have as an author. Um, Got to keep moving through these. There's so many of them. Number 30. Choose whether you're a comedy or a drama at the start and stick to it. Don't make a comedy and turn it into a drama later on. That just annoys people. So I think it was 90s Nickelodeon or maybe 2000s that really pushed for the dramedy series. Let me actually look into that a bit. So yeah, there are plenty of dramedy series, including looks like Better Call Saul, Boy Meets World, which I loved Boy Meets World back in the day. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is bad. I've never seen Burn Notice. I don't think anyone knows what Burn Notice is. Doctor Who is actually a really good example because Doctor Who can be really funny at times and also really dramatic at times. So that's another good example. I actually disagree with The Flash there. Full House had some pretty dramatic episodes. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Okay. So I'm going to assume, I'm going to be as nice as I can and assume she means don't start as a comedy and don't become a drama, as in like fully dramatic, no comedy, but I cannot think of anything that did that. Even Red versus Blue, which I honestly thought was funny and enjoyable, and it did kind of become cringy to me later on as they started taking themselves too seriously. But even in the times when they took themselves super seriously, it was still obviously a comedy. And another example of this would be Rick and Morty, which I'm not personally a fan of, but people really enjoy that show. And it is arguably much more drama now than comedy, and people still love it. So, I agree on a fundamental level, but there is so much wiggle room there. It may as well be like a walk-in closet. 31. World building is like salt. A pinch can make it better. 10 cups of it will not. What do you mean, woman? I honestly don't know what this means because when you give me a simile, it's not very helpful in most cases because I genuinely don't know what you're saying. What is your scale? I mean, how much world building is okay? Because I don't know if you've heard, but one of the most in-depth universes of all fiction is an extremely popular series. You may know it. It's called Lord of the Rings, and the world building is intense. And there are many people who would say that the Lord of the Rings books are some of the best pieces of fiction on Earth. If you're saying Harry Potter style world building is the best, in which there is no world building, you'd be wrong. Because I honestly don't know how the Harry Potter world functions. It's just, I have no idea what you're saying. It's just, it's very unhelpful advice. If I'm reading this as someone who's trying to be an author, which I am, and I'm going to take your advice seriously, which I'm not, and I read this, I'm not going to know how to apply that. Honestly, if I read this and I took her words seriously, I would erase most of the world building from my book because that's how it reads. That's just awful advice. That is just awful advice. You can put in as much world building as you want as long as it flows naturally in your story. For instance, I'm working on a story where basically the main character is introduced to a culture that he knows nothing about. And, that's generally how you would go about world building is you have a character who doesn't understand a concept and you would introduce them to that concept. And it's done in nearly every piece of fiction ever. And that's what I'm working on. My character, he doesn't understand the culture of the land that he's brought to, and so they have to explain it to him. And maybe he'll have to explain things from his culture to them. And that's just very basic storytelling. 32, characters should always come before anything else. Again, I think I would agree with the sentiment here. The phrasing is awful. Again, that should always is not okay. You know, I realize that's kind of like only a Sith deals in absolutes statements, but the phrase should always stay out of your mind as a writer. You know, fiction is fluid. All right, fiction is fluid. Things constantly change depending on circumstance, and something that might seem like an awful idea can be brilliant. I mean, the lived-in sci-fi that Star Wars revolutionized, it probably sounded like a really bad idea at the time. Like, yeah, you know, all this super space-age technology that looks all futuristic, we're gonna make it look old and crappy. Like, that doesn't sound like a good idea, but it works on paper. And personally, I think you could have a good story developing a world first and then putting characters in that world, which, now that I'm saying that out loud, basically sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. But you know, while those aren't always known for their best you know, plot progression, and they're not generally considered good as far as normal storytelling goes, I really do think something interesting could come out of that, but I don't know if that's what you mean by characters should always come, you know, before anything else. I don't know what that means to put characters first, but I guess I would agree on a very I would agree on a very, very loose level. Number 33, the protagonist should be a protagonist. Very well said. Not just a vessel for the antagonist to hog the story. If you're going to make a villain protagonist, just open with that. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I'll move past this one. I have no idea what that is trying to say. Number 34, perspective shifts are a staple of storytelling. Having only one perspective isn't a stylistic choice, it's just crap. Okay, no. Again, I'm gonna keep repeating this, but that's because it's a problem with this whole thread, is just these definitive statements of, this is not what you do in storytelling. It's honestly ridiculous. You can have a good story that only stays in one perspective. You know, I looked up a list, and some of the books that are written in some of the books written in first person are Huckleberry Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird, Jane Eyre, The Great Gatsby, and Moby Dick, which, again, I'm not entirely sure which ones of those switch from first person at times, or even if any of them do, because to be quite honest, I haven't read any of them in years. I think last time I read The Great Gatsby, I must have been like 14, so I honestly don't remember much from that book. But yeah, you can obviously, you can have a good story that only has one perspective. And honestly, you can have a good story with any fundamental concept. All right, they made a movie that was entirely in first person, Hardcore Henry, and while I'm not even sure if it's good or not, they did it, so it is possible, you know. And any problems that there may or may not be with that movie, the fact that it exists shows that, oh, you can just chisel away the bad parts from it if there, you know, are any major flaws with that film. I mean, you can do anything in storytelling. It is all execution. 35. If you're making a cartoon, hire writers. Don't just have your storyboarders write the story. That's not what they're there for. Artists draw, writers write. Artists cannot just take over for the writers on a whim. I would agree with most of that. I would agree with most of that. I do think there are artists that can tell good stories, however. I can't give any examples off the top of my head, to be fair. But Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I do think a lot of modern cartoons should hire writers. When they're not hiring writers, they're hiring storyboard artists. So, pretty good point. Uh, Related to Rule 2, I'm not going to go all the way back and read that. Will They, Won't They isn't a fun story. It's just addiction peddling. We need to stop pretending Ross Rachel was good storytelling and learn to appreciate Chandler, Monica, and Joey Rachel. Again, I have not watched enough of Friends to know what they're talking about here, but I did watch, all right, and this is going to come out of the blue for a lot of people because I don't see people talking about this show anymore. I did watch Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman, and there was a lot of pulling those two apart, pushing them together, pulling them apart, pushing them together in that show. And so I would agree fundamentally with this one. Will they, won't they? Genuinely, or sorry, will they, won't they? Generally doesn't make a fun story. I won't say it doesn't, but generally it's not very appealing to an audience. 37. Romance trope but gay is not an absolute rule to live by. If She-Ra taught us anything, it's that gay Raylo was not actually an improvement. So here's the thing, I understand all those words individually, but when put together in that way, I understand not a one. Romance trope, but gay. Yeah, I guess gay Raylo isn't better than Raylo. Sure. I'll agree with that, because Raylo's garbage. Number 38. Someone on this hell site once made the remark, we need more lesbian non-con because purity is boring? What is non-con? Oh, lovely. I'm. Oh, that's great. That is wonderful. Okay, gonna need to delete my circuit. We need more lesbian non-con because purity is boring. That is a dangerous, violent person. Do not listen to them. They do not have a point. Seriously, what is wrong with you people? Yeah, sure. That's not really this strays away so far from writing advice, but sure, yeah, writing non-consent into your story may be okay on some websites, but again, if you're writing it as just a thing that happens and not as a romance because that's what you think romance should be, sure. But if you fall into the latter, I don't trust you. Number 39, women who fetishize abuse. I only know Raylos. I don't know what the heck this is. And present it as something feminist and paint detractors as misogynists. Okay, women who fetishize abuse and present it as something feminist and paint detractors as misogynists are gaslighting you. Don't listen to them. That is true. Yes, you are not a misogynist for disliking Raylo. Also, doesn't make you a good person. It just means you recognize bad writing. Honestly, I don't even care about the abuse part of Raylo. It's just bad writing in the first place, because the sequels are awful. Moving on, number 40. If abuse. Okay, what is going on here? How many is that? How many does that make? Okay. One, two, three, four. Okay, we are on our fourth one that is basically just complaining about Raylo and is hardly writing advice. If abuse fetishists are complaining about you not caving into their demands, just block them, don't argue with them. This is not writing advice. This is telling you how to survive on Twitter. Block people. Don't enter into conversations. Block people. Rape victims are not. Okay, well, why? What? What is going on here? You're just saying that painting people as detractors, painting detractors as misogynists is gaslighting, and then like 2 tweets later, you're like, actually, this is actual misogyny, though. I don't understand. I remember there being something with Blizzard and a rape victim, but I don't know. It says rape victims are not villains and should never be written as villains. Again, the phrase should never be in a writer's lexicon. Um, but why not though? Why is being a victim of rape make you not a villain more than being a victim of anything would make you? That honestly doesn't make sense. Just because a character is a rape victim doesn't make them not a villain. That's a very strange point. These are just aspects of them. I mean, these are both just labels. Rape victim, villain, those are both just labels that can be applied to a character. And obviously, both of them, obviously, the former will very fundamentally shift who they are as a person, but they could still be the former and the latter. It doesn't really make sense to me to just say, oh no, if a character's been through something traumatic, they can't be a villain. That's just nonsense. Uh, oh. Ugh. If straight men really hate a character but lesbians love them, there's a 90% chance that is your best character. Okay, have you ever heard of this show called Batwoman? It's really bad. It's really bad, but there are a lot of lesbians out there that love that show and who genuinely think that Ruby Rose, or I'm sorry, who genuinely think that Kate Kane is an amazing character. And she's not. And I would wager that a lot of straight men don't like that show because of how much it insults them. But again, that's just this identity politics of just, oh, these people don't like your show, but these, okay, let me just okay, I'm gonna read through this but change some of the words. If black people really hate a certain character but white people love them, there's a 90% chance that is your best character. Did that sound awful to you? Did that sound like a horrible thing to say? It's because it is. Okay. Okay. If one of your writers believes Simon... Okay, I don't know what this is. I've never seen Infinity Train, because I'm an adult. I'm sorry, that was mean. Yeah, I've never seen Infinity Train, but apparently this character did something bad. And if you believe a bad character is misunderstood, then you deserve to be fired. That's a very strong thing to say. Actually, now that I'm reading through that, to say a writer should be fired because of their interpretation of a character, that's horrible. Oh my god. 44. The best solution to a love triangle is polyamory. No. Polyamory is not a solution to anything. Really quickly, I just want to say polyamory is 9 times out of 10 an abuse tactic. Okay? And I know that sounds horrible, but it honestly is. I have seen so many stories from people who, they just, one of the members, shall we say, of the relationship is like, oh, hey, let's bring someone else in. And it always ends up poorly, okay? And also, just, that's not a good story. Because that doesn't make a good story because not everyone is polyamorous. And in fact, a very small percent of people are. And so, to just say, like, oh, well, you can solve this love triangle if you all just get together, all three of you. I mean, to be clear, love triangles aren't interesting to start with, or rather, a very small amount of love triangles can be done well. Okay, and the only love triangle I can think of is the stupid reboot of Star Trek that J.J. Abrams did, where both Spock and Kirk are into Uhura. And that's a bad example because Kirk and Spock, definitely had something going on in that series. But that's just a stupid thing to say because it doesn't make a story any better. It doesn't. That's really the end of it. Is that this writing tip won't make your story any better. Okay. 45. If you have a male character who actually shows respect and admiration to a woman, and some of your viewers call that character a simp, there is a 90% chance you have a good character. Okay, this is simpish already. From actually shows respect and admiration to a woman, that's already simp language right there. All right, we don't respect women in this house. All right, we respect that bread. All right, King, keep your head up, King. Okay, that's just stupid. Because here's the thing: is with this type of person, and again, never seen a video from this person, um, never seen anything on Twitter from this person except for this thread. And just from what I'm looking at, I can tell this is what type of person this is. And these are the type of people who like to change definitions around to get whatever they want. And I've already read through 46 a little bit, just because my eyes wander, and I can tell it's going to come up more. But just changing definitions to get the result that you want. And look, there are characters that are simps, all right? Mordecai from Regular Show is a simp. He regularly ditches out on his bro to try and, chase some tail, and that is simp behavior. I'm sorry. Like, it gets to a point where it's like, yeah, there are guys out there who are calling way too many people simps to the point where it kind of loses its meaning, but at the end of the day, there are simps, and you can't just say, oh, well, they're just calling my character a simp because he actually shows respect and admiration for a woman. Which, by the way, you don't show admiration to a woman, you show admiration for a woman. So you would phrase it as saying, actually shows respect to and admiration for a woman. Anyway, moving on, because that's just, ugh. And I really want to get to this one. Mary Sue is not a real criticism. It's thinly veiled misogyny, always disregarded. Excuse me? You have a video talking about why the Legend of Korra is garbage, and admittedly, Korra isn't a Mary Sue, she's basically an anti-Sue, whereas a Mary Sue is like Rey from Star Wars, whereas a character like Rey, who is instantly good at everything she tries to do and overpowers all of her opponents and everyone's in love with her, that's a Mary Sue. Korra pretty much loses every battle. She's awful at what she does, but everyone keeps telling her that she's amazing, and everyone is still in love with her. She literally dates every person in her friend circle because they all love her that much and think she's amazing and she's the Avatar, and you gotta deal with it. That is an anti-Sue, where they're actually bad at their job, but everyone keeps telling them they're amazing. Mary Sue, I will admit, Mary Sue is not a real criticism. But what about the definition of a Mary Sue? What if I tell you it's a problem that everyone loves your character? What if I tell you it's a problem that this character doesn't struggle at all? That's criticism. But I'm defining a Mary Sue. So this is the problem with these people, is that you'll say Mary Sue and they'll disregard, and they'll be like, oh, Mary Sue, that's not a real criticism. And you're like, okay, but what about what a Mary Sue actually is? All right, we've done away with the term, but now I'm just going to have to explain to you what a Mary Sue is. All right, and I'm going to explain these criticisms to you, and they'll still just disregard it. All right, it's labeling and dismissing. Okay, it's labeling and dismissing of just this criticism. It's just misogyny. Disregard it. I can tell. Okay, I have no idea if this person has written anything, but I will never read anything that she wrote just from this. Well, maybe I will read something that she wrote, but I promise you it's not going to be good. Anyone who views criticism this way has never written anything good in their lives. Anyone who takes criticism and says, oh, it's actually bigotry, immediately disregard it, that's a problem. Okay, emotional vulnerability does not make a female character anti-feminist. Why would it, though? I honestly don't understand. Women are some of the most emotionally vulnerable creatures on the planet. Goblins are inherently anti-Semitic. No. No, they're not. No, they're not. They are goblins. They are creatures that exist. If there's something about orcs in here, I'm gonna rage quit like life. I will actually kill myself if there's something about orcs in here. Goblins are inherently 50 replies. Wow, most of these have like, 3, 4, 8, 1, 9, 8, but 50 replies on I've got to read this. There's got to be some good ones in here. This one says, you just posted cringe. As a person of Jewish ancestry, I'm appalled you assume this. I've never seen a goblin and been like, oh look, a Jew, like me. They're not. I'm part Jew. I like this one. Could you elaborate, or did you pull these full words from a hat and put them together? Please, I beg you, for the love of God, read another book. Yeah, a lot of these are just saying I'm Jewish and no, they're not. This is a good one. Oh, this one's actually informative. I want to look into this one. The first recorded instance of a goblin was in 1195. The racial caricatures of Jewish people, which depicted them as large-nosed and liking money, are from the mid-13th century, around 1250. Please do research. And yeah, she said inherently, so that actually responds to that. So I'd need to do research into this one before I give you that like, but you deserve it, my friend. Not at all inherently, can be. That's fair. Goblins aren't, though. That's J.K. Rowling. I don't know what this one is supposed to mean. No reasons given, I see. Very, very nice observation there. This one. That is something I did not know, and had to have a bit of a Google to find some reference point for. Yeah, if you Googled goblins are anti-Semitic, you're going to find results that tell you they're anti-Semitic, but if you actually look into that, you'll find they aren't. That comment was extreme, the single worst take. Okay, so it looks like there are a lot of people in here who are just like, yeah, that's not true. If your first thought when told about a bigoted trope, bury your gaze, I don't know what that means. Oh, it means like gay characters that die. Queer characters. Why is that word okay now? Okay. If your first thought when told about a bigoted trope is to try and figure out how to do it well, you're a huge turd who is missing the point. I've noticed a very limited vocabulary from somebody who's supposed to be giving me writing advice. It's not that these tropes aren't, quote, done well, it's just that they're done too much. No, I think it is that they're not done well. Because when you look at J.K. Rowling's depiction of a goblin versus Tolkien's depiction of a goblin, I think even she would agree those are very different depictions of goblins, and that one is probably more okay than the other, or, you know, more done well. But yeah, it's like that post that said like half of Twitter is someone making up a person and then getting mad at that person. That's what this tweet is. I've never known that to be a thing. That people who are like, oh, gay people dying in fiction is a problem. How could I do it well? I've never seen that, but hey, maybe she has. Number 50, big 50, finally. Writing a relationship based on a, quote, dynamic or trying to get a particular trope into the story is a bad decision. No. That could be an entire premise of your story. Is I see this thing done all the time and I want to subvert it. Alright, that's how Madoka Magica came about, which I'm not sure if it's good or not. I haven't watched it yet, but Madoka Magica was all about, all right, I want to take this magical girl genre and I want to do something with it. So I mean, it was it was based on, you know, a trope, but I guess it does say relationship, but I mean, I don't see how you would separate the two. I don't see how writing a relationship based on a trope is different from writing a story based on a trope, in which case, you know, we can talk about Evangelion, where that was written based on how horrifying, you know, how horrifying mecha anime would be to actually live through, where you're constantly getting attacked by monsters and your last line of defense is teenagers. And I personally think that Evangelion's amazing. Not the final episode, though. Watch the movie. Don't even watch the final episode. It's garbage. Okay. Vitriol does not immediately render criticism invalid. If you tone police criticism, you will likely miss something important. That is a good point, but you have not followed that yourself. Alright. How is calling a character a Mary Sue any different from having a certain tone of voice? Okay, so someone could say to you, here are all the problems with your character, or they could use the shorthand and call her or him. Okay, there are many male Mary Sues. Superman's been called a Mary Sue, though I don't necessarily agree. Kirito from Sword Art Online is absolutely a Mary Sue. But the point is they could either tell you the problems with the character, or they could call them a Mary Sue, both of which eventually mean the same thing once you enter into that conversation. And you yourself have said to label and dismiss that criticism. So, yes, 51 is a great point. So, follow it, Lily Orchard. Follow it. Number 52. Your fandom will fight and argue. This is how people solve conflicts. It's typically better to let them fight it out than to be complacent and beg people to, quote, just stop fighting. Great point, actually. I am getting sick and tired of creators entering into their own fandoms. It's really frustrating. I actually agree with this one wholeheartedly. 53. Related to the above, every headcanon is valid, should never leave your mouth. Do you want pedophiles and fascists in your fan base? Because that's what you get, pedophiles and fascists in your fan base. No, you get pedophiles and fascists because there are pedophiles and fascists in the world, and they exist, and they will go wherever they please because they are human beings with free will. Here's the thing. Every headcanon is valid. It's just true based on the description of a headcanon. A headcanon, for those of you who don't know, is something that you say that you believe to be true unless it's directly contradicted by whatever media it is you're consuming. And by definition, they are valid, you know? Which, ugh. Again, yes, writers, don't enter your own fan base. Don't egg them on. Don't be like, yeah, make that Rule 34. Don't do that, because it's super cringy. But this whole pedophiles and fascists thing, it's like, you really think you're important, don't you? You really think you're doing something. You think you're changing the world with your... You literally said, I yell about cartoons for a living, and you think you're changing the world for a better place because you're getting those pedophiles and fascists out of the My Little Pony My Little Pony fan base, which you are not doing. You have not succeeded in doing that. 54. Speaking out against abused fetishists, pedophiles, and bigots in your fanbase will always be better in the long run than being quiet or complacent. It might be exhausting to deal with, but it's better for everyone in the long run. This is actually going directly against what I just said. No, stay out of your own fanbase, man. Let them deal with that themselves. You don't need to say a word, alright? Because here's the thing. By the standard for humans is that you are not an abuse fetish. The standard for humans, whenever I meet someone, it is assumed that they are not an abuser, a pedophile, or a bigot, you know? That's just assumed when you meet someone. You don't meet someone and be like, oh, is he a pedophile? He might be. You know, that's not how humanity works. And so, if you don't say anything, no one's going to be like, oh, he's definitely a pedophile because the people in his fan base are egging this on. No, stay out of it. Stay out of it. They can figure that out amongst themselves. You don't need to feed yourself to the dogs like that. Number 55. Fan service is a concept you should never think about. Fans who need to be serviced are not actually fans. If you have fans, those fans are already having fun and don't need to be pandered to. I don't think you know what fan service is. There are multiple things I would describe as fan service in multiple different ways. For instance, let's say I'm writing a Dragon Ball movie. Let's say I'm writing a Dragon Ball Z movie, and I have Goku use his pole from the original Dragon Ball. You know, and he's riding on Nimbus, and he uses his magic pole. I forget what it's called. That would be fan service, because realistically, Goku is way too strong at this point to be needing either of those things. But fans would really enjoy it because they'd be like, oh man, I remember the original Dragon Ball series. This is awesome. It's such a cool moment. And that's all fan service is. It's having a moment where your fans go like, oh man, awesome. Or fan service is your characters putting on bikinis for no reason. That's also a thing that exists, but whatever. But yeah, you can have fan service in whatever you do. Fan service, you know, in small amounts, fan service is lovely. There are times when it goes way too far and it just becomes a nostalgia fest, and it's like, okay, I get it. You're referencing the old thing, move on. And that's something that the new Star Wars movies have done really poorly, where it's constant fan service, but at the end of the day, like, you know, a little bit is fine. Number 56, the tendency for shipping to dominate discourse is the biggest sign that characters and their relationships are more satisfying than anything else. People didn't petition for a 4th season of Kim Possible to see what happened with Draken or to see new villains. Okay, I'm sorry. This is another one of those ones where I'm like multiple read throughs because I'm not understanding it. I guess she's saying that the fact that people argue about shipping the most means that people care more about characters and their relationships than plot development, which can be true, but I don't think people were upset at season 8 of Game of Thrones for shipping reasons. I think it was plot development. But I mean, those two things really do go hand in hand, so whatever. This is just another one that's saying that characters are important, which, yeah, characters are important. Number 57. Complaints about too much negativity is shooting the messenger. If there is an overabundance of negativity, that means there's things to be negative about. People cannot be positive without things to be positive about. Don't know what that means. Huh. Yeah, I will agree. There are a lot of people who say too much negativity, but it usually means a different thing. It usually means people are negative about the show itself, which I don't know if that's what she's saying here. Because, yeah, there are people who say, like, oh, there's so much toxicity in this fan base, when it's really just people saying, like, oh, hey, this is bad, you know? Um, which, again, a lot of this criticism actually does tie into Star Wars, of a lot of people saying like, "Oh, you're so toxic. Why are you so negative about these new films?" When it's like, no, I'm not being negative. They're just bad. Um, so yeah, I would say instead of complaining about negativity, work to see what could give people a more positive experience. Again, very tentative to agree with that. But anyway, number 58. If you do something bigoted and get yelled at for it, listen to the people yelling at you. Cancel culture isn't real. The rage and vitriol will be gone in 2 weeks, and you'll be a better person for it. Getting yelled at stopped being the end of the world at age 10. No, cancel culture is absolutely a real thing. I'm not saying it works 100% of the time, but it is a culture. There are people out there who want to cancel other people. All right? There are people out there who will constantly campaign for people to lose their jobs, to get their Twitter suspended, to make it so that they are unable to have a Patreon page. That is an actual thing that people do. And this whole the rage and vitriol will be gone in 2 weeks. Yeah, after they leave you destitute, the rage and vitriol will be gone. You won't be a better person for it. You'll be a whipped into shape person, is what you'll be. Um, Also, I love the assumption immediately leading into this. If you do something bigoted and get yelled at for it, that there's been cases where that's not even what happened. I mean, honestly, before the term came about, I guess a form of cancel culture would be the Steven Universe fan art thing, where somebody drew a fat character as skinny, and that just became this whole like massive problem, and they tried to cancel her life, but that is still in essence the same thing of getting so outraged at something someone did that was at the end of the day harmless. All right, like it is harmless, most of the things that people try to do this for, but the whole, it's funny, she was talking about gaslighting earlier. Telling people cancel culture isn't real is gaslighting, because it absolutely is. It is a thing that happens, and I'm not saying it works 100% of the time or even 50% of the time, but people do try to cancel other people. The fact that they don't get left on the street, with not a penny to their name, doesn't mean that it's not real, because it so obviously is. All right. Oh, again, she drew me in, and I forgot. Again, that's not writing advice. There's no writing advice here. This is completely wow. I didn't even realize how quickly we just got off course here. Number 59. The quickest and easiest way to make yelling stop is to own up to the mistake. Don't make excuses or explain why you did the bad thing. Fix it and never repeat it. Progressives are very forgiving if you give them results. Stubbornness is what gets people canceled. I'm gonna need you to cite a source on that, alright? Can you please? Again, you just said cancel culture isn't real, and then you were like, oh, if you want to make it stop, just do what we tell you to. This is I honestly hate the whole, like, oh, I label myself a progressive, therefore I can't be wrong, because I'm progressing society. I can't be wrong. Stubbornness is what. Okay, I didn't even register that last sentence. Cancel culture isn't real. Stubbornness is what gets people canceled. Please tell me someone else pointed that out. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, do what I want or I'll keep harassing you. This single tweet alone contradicts several of your past tweets. It's kind of impressive. I agree. That is a very abuser thing to say. Yeah, literally one tweet before this, you say cancel culture isn't real. Progressives are really nice as long as you do as you're told, no matter whether you are right or wrong. I'm not going to give that a like because they're spelling U and R as letters. The quickest and easiest way to make yelling stop is to own up to the mistake, something you have failed to do for years. I don't know what she did, but so the rule is don't listen to trolls. Everyone is a troll, but listen to trolls if I agree with them. Exactly. Exactly. That is an amazing point there. It looks like a Danganronpa profile picture. I don't know. Yeah, that's just not ignoring the progressive part. Nobody is forgiving on the internet. No one is ever forgiven for anything. Forced diversity is a right-wing dog whistle, not a criticism. So I would agree, forced diversity isn't criticism, and most people who use the phrase don't even think it is. Forced diversity is a concept, all right, not a criticism. Forced diversity can lead to things that can be criticized. For instance, again, if your focus is on anything but making your script amazing, if your focus is on anything but your script is going to suffer. Just as a basic thing. So if you're focusing on, oh, well, I need to put this character in there and this character in there and this character in there, and I really need to capture their experience as, some identity politics laden, word salad of, oh, I need to make sure I capture their experience as an Asian man. I need to capture their experience as a black woman in my script. If your focus is on that instead of just making a good script, your script is going to suffer. And that would be an example of, forced diversity of. I don't agree it's the greatest I don't agree that it's the greatest way to phrase that, but I mean, just it's self-evident. If your focus is on anything but making a tight script, your script isn't going to be very tight. It's going to be focused on other things. So I highly disagree with that one. Number 61. Reclaimed slurs are not universal and as such should never be included in a work. What about queer? I want to know her opinion on that. Like, is it okay for, if I'm writing a book about the struggles of the LBGTQIA plus, is it okay for me to put the word queer in there? I mean, that's a reclaimed slur. What if my book has a couple of black dudes calling each other nigga? Like, is that okay? I mean, that's a reclaimed slur. And this phrase has been popping up so much in this thread. Sorry. No, go back. This phrase has been popping up so much in this thread. Should never. And I keep saying it, but should never be in the lexicon of a writer. Number 62. Oppressed people fighting against their oppressors are not villains. No, I don't care if you think they went too far. Not all those who respond with violence are wrong, and not all those who preach nonviolence are right to do so. Okay, so the closest thing I can think of about this is Killmonger from Black Panther, who basically, if you actually watch the movie and you listen to the things he says, he legitimately advocates for like white genocide. Killmonger's goal is basically to fight against the oppression of the black man by taking over the world, even if it takes killing children to do so, which I think is the definition of going too far. That is just a ridiculous statement. People who fight against their oppressors can be villains, yes. Especially, I mean, we can take those definitions so far of what an oppressed people are. Because, I mean, I hate to get all historical and somewhat political on this, but the Crusades happened after white people had been enslaved by, the Saracens, the Muslims, and a lot of people would still interpret the Crusaders as villains, and perhaps rightfully so. It's a cycle, and you can have a story about not perpetuating a cycle of violence. You can also do it well if you're not Naughty Dog. But again, this is not writing advice. This isn't writing advice. This is, my personal politics and why it should be in your story. Related to the above, a good spin on the heroes never kill mantra is to highlight how refusing to kill a villain who later goes on to kill more innocent people makes the hero responsible for their deaths. Okay, so you want this theme. You want this theme of how refusing to kill a villain who later goes on to kill more innocent people makes the hero responsible for those deaths. You want that theme in every single story? Is that what you want? Because that sounds so boring. That sounds really... that sounds just overdone. Batman has had to face with the idea that he is responsible for the crimes the Joker commits time and time again, and it's just boring, alright? And again, a hero's obligation that he has accepted is that he must prevent crime, alright? What he has not accepted is the obligation to carry out a sentence, okay? There are very few superheroes that actually carry out sentences on the people that they apprehend. It's never made sense to me. Batman's job is not to carry out a sentence. Superman's job is not to carry out a sentence, unless, it's like General Zod and he puts him in the Phantom Zone or something. But, yeah, Spider-Man isn't webbing people up and throwing them in a cell. He's leaving them for the police to find. It is not a hero's job to carry out the sentence, and that's what I'm saying about that. Number 64. If you're writing fantasy and you have no issue having dragons in your world, but suddenly think people of color are unrealistic because something medieval Europe, you're a huge turd and an idiot. Again, I cannot believe this person is a writer. You could have called me a microcephalic clod. Right? You could have called me an addlepate. You could have called me anything, but you keep using huge turd and idiot. Like a child. Alright, I'm calling you a child. Also, how would that make it better? That's what I want to know. Because people bring this up all the time, of having, people of color, which is just a fancy way of saying colored people, in fantasy stories. And I want to know, how would that make it better? I don't believe it would make it worse, but how would it make it better? Okay? And at the end of the day, I write my stories how I want to write them. And let's say I have a story that takes place in medieval Europe, and a dragon shows up, and to them, they're not expecting that. It's not a fantasy world, it's medieval Europe, and all of a sudden fantasy elements get thrown into it. Okay, there's a very different... I don't see how this is... I don't see how this even correlates. If I have a story where aliens show up in the middle of World War II, okay, that's something unrealistic that's happened, because aliens aren't real. Or, at the very least, they didn't show up in World War II. But if I write that into my story, and then people tell me, oh, well, why didn't you have an equal amount of black people and women serving in the American Army? I would call them idiots, because that's not what happened in World War II. And they could make this exact same argument of, oh, well, aliens showed up, so why can't you just change everything about this historical fantasy? It's the exact same argument, and it's stupidity. It's pure identity politics of, you have to throw this thing in there because I want it in there. By the way, as a half Mexican myself, if I was watching Merlin and a guy just wanders in, he's like, "Eh, cabrón!" Like, I would stop watching the show then and there. Actually, I wouldn't, because that sounds amazing, but it would definitely take me out of the experience. Anyway, number 65. Sexual tension and chemistry are not only indicators of a potential Sexual tension and chemistry are not the only indicators of a potential relationship, and in a relationship is the quickest thing to fade. You have had a horrible life if you think chemistry immediately fades in relation, or maybe they mean sexual chemistry, but I don't. Okay, so yes, sexual tension is not the only indicator of a potential relationship, but I don't see that being a problem in most forms of media. I mean, usually, unless we're talking about a very specific kind of fiction, I usually see relationships in movies as this guy who's just like, oh man, she did that one thing that is really cute and like I love her. You know, it's very rarely like, oh, sexual tension. You know, when I think of a great relationship in fiction, I think Pride and Prejudice, mostly because I just watched it the other day. But there's not a whole lot of like, quote unquote sexual tension in that movie. They are two very intelligent people who respect each other and who adore each other by the end of it. Um, so yeah, I would agree mostly. Yeah, I would agree with this one, but I just don't see it as addressing a current problem. The best potential romantic partner for a character is her best friend. They're best friends for a reason. That is wrong. Okay, they're people say this all the time of like the best relationships are one in which you're best friends. No, no, Being best friends with someone and being their boyfriend it's just a very, very different experience. Um, and I don't even think I should have to explain why. I mean, it's a different relationship entirely. Um, being married being married isn't the same as being best friends who have sex sometimes. It's just flat out different. The dynamic changes in its entirety. And by the way, there are people who are straight and their best friends are the same gender as them, so they would not enter into a romantic relationship with their best friends. Which to steelman the point, she probably assumed that like yes, their sexual orientation allows for them to be in a relationship, but it's rarely ever true that your best romantic option is your best friend. Um, I don't want X character to be defined by her. Ugh, I don't want X character to be defined by her relationships is a stupid philosophy to have. Everyone is defined by their relationships. That's how human beings work. No, I'm not defined by my relationships. I mean, in essence, I am who I am because of my relationships with my parents who helped kind of, form me. A lot of the music I like is the music that they played when I was a kid. Um, the movies that I like, I'm a huge fan of the original trilogy of Star Wars because my mom is a huge fan of the original trilogy of Star Wars. I'm a huge fan of Zelda because, again, my mom, played Zelda when she was a kid on the NES. One of my favorite movies at the moment is The Last Dragon because it's one of my dad's favorite movies. But I mean, I'm not defined by who my friends are because I mean, we can stretch everything to say it's a relationship. Like, yes, the way I was raised is technically reflected in my relationship with my parents, but it seems like stretching a definition in order to make a point because yes, your character should not be well, I'm not going to say should not because again, you see, when you're speaking, it's a very easy thing to do to accidentally say should not, but when you're writing, I feel like you should be able to catch yourself on that one. But generally speaking, good characters are not defined by who their friends are. They would be the same even if you took their friends out of the equation. But, I mean, here's the thing there's a whole balance with this, and she just wrote one tweet. And it's very frustrating to read someone speak so definitively, especially to say this idea of, I don't want her to be defined by her relationships is stupid. To just define, someone's belief as stupid, just definitively, is very... I don't mean to sound childish, but it's pretty mean, 68. If you don't want a character to only be remembered for a romantic subplot, don't end the story on that subplot reaching its conclusion. Give it time to sink in and become the new normal for the viewer. The memorable moment will always be the last moment. What? The memorable moment will always be... This is basically the same thing they said earlier, of the best time to get two people together is in the middle of a story, which I already talked about, and my throat's starting to hurt. Oh, okay. So they're saying the most memorable moment of a character will always be their last moment. And if their last moment is on the end of their romance, that's how they're going to be remembered, is their romance. Which, no, I highly disagree with that. While I would agree that The Legend of Korra ended horribly, because it was a horrible show, that's not the most memorable moment of the show for me. When I think Legend of Korra, I don't think of the last moment of the last episode. And even for an example of a good show, the most memorable moment of Avatar: The Last Airbender isn't the last moment for me. Very strange thing to say. Yeah, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, The Last Airbender ends on a romantic subplot reaching its conclusion. Aang and Katara, they kiss, and then it says the end. And that's the end of that, romantic subplot. But they're such well-developed characters that neither of them are remembered simply for being in a romantic relationship with the other. Yeah, this is all kinds of bad take. Number 69. Slow burn does not mean taking forever to get together. It means full series, long romantic subplot. Getting together is the start of a romantic subplot, not the end. Okay. Getting together is the start of romantic... It could be the start or the end. Again, I love Pride and Prejudice. It ends with, It ends... basically it ends with Jane and Mr. Darcy getting together. And that's the end of not even the romantic subplot, it's the end of the plot, is they get together. So, I mean, you're just flat out wrong here. I mean, that's the thing, is your story about these two people getting together, or is it about the relationship of these two people? Because one of them is the start of the story, and the other is the end. So, I mean, it's just... I'm honestly, getting tired at this point. It's really just tiring. Number 70. Sexual awakening is not a real character arc. I'm going to have to look into what that means by reading some of these comments, because I don't know what that means. Depends on story's themes. Bad take. Deactivate for the sake of others, please. Sure. Alright, I would agree. Depends on the themes of the story. This one. The only people who think boob armor makes sense are people who have never touched a boob. First off, define your terms. Again. Also, there are 3 videos... Okay. There are 3 videos I could point you to prove you wrong. And people... Oh, man. It makes me mad. I love Shadiversity. Shadiversity is my man. If I could be anyone on YouTube, I would be Shadiversity. I love that man. His knowledge is astounding, and the way he presents his arguments is just as amazing. Shadiversity, if you don't know, is not just someone who... He does a lot of research on swords, like he looks on Wikipedia or something. He has a degree in, I believe, medieval history. And he goes into very, very expansive detail in 3 separate videos about specifically about armor made to fit a woman, in which he says you're wrong. Yeah, okay. First thing, Shadiversity has annihilated this argument. This person, okay, this happens so often where women like Anita Sarkeesian and this person who I'm going to guess also has a pretty modest, you know, chest, bring forth this argument, and immediately people say like, "Oh, I'm rather large-chested, and I would highly disagree." Um, yeah, another person. So that's one, two. Another person linking Shadiversity. Another person referencing Shadiversity, I believe. Uh, okay, this one, I literally had this argument with someone yesterday, and their justification was, well, this girl I knew drew it like that. That's not a bad point. If someone, if a woman tells you, oh yeah, it's fine for a character to be drawn this way, how is that not an argument? Anita Sarkeesian will never notice you. You don't know how armor works. Okay. Let me see if I can I actually find like what this person looks like, because oh, yikes. Yikes. Okay. Yeah, this person um this person definitely does not know the struggle, we'll say. Number 72. The bow and arrow are strength weapons, not dexterity weapons. Female characters who do archery should naturally be very physically strong. Longbows have a draw weight of 800 to 150 pounds. Rangers are always stronger than warriors. Deal with it. I don't know what you're trying to say here. Characters can be naturally physically strong without being super buff, I guess would be my response, because I don't know what you're actually criticizing here. You haven't said. I love, okay. Defining ranged weaponry by D&D stats is a futile effort. Where is it? This one's actually true. Firing a bow requires a very specific muscle group. Yeah, I'm trying to see what her actual point is here. I'm guessing is that people draw archers without being strong enough. Let me actually look up. She's not like super buff. Yeah, it's a fairly average arms, and that's recurve, not compound. So I can't really. Obviously, I don't know too much about archery. I couldn't tell you like how much that probably. Okay, now I'm gonna look up average recurve. Well, that's another thing is that you can get bows with different draw weights. Yeah. Oh, I see. So this person just Googled uh, longbow draw weight, got 80 between 150 pounds, assumed that the English longbow was the standard for fantasy weapons, despite the fact that the current highest ranked female archer is probably only drawing at max like 50. And like your bow doesn't have to be a certain draw weight in order to be effective. And I'm ignoring the fact that I went on this whole thing without even realizing I don't know what she's trying to say here, and I don't know how it improves writing. Again, I've got to go back to the top of this thread to make sure this is a thread about writing. Yeah, okay. Just making sure these are supposed to be writing tips, and here we are talking about I guess how big female characters' arms are. All right, number 73. The best way to avoid tokenism is multiple characters, or just making them all white. I know. I'm a genius. Yeah. Okay. So this is basically so earlier this person said that tokenism or earlier this person said that forced diversity or tokenism isn't real, and now they're telling you how to avoid tokenism, which isn't real, by the way, despite the fact that it clearly is. Also, this is really bad advice. The best way to avoid tokenism is by not putting in characters simply for their race or their sexuality. The best way to avoid tokenism is by writing strong characters that all have a purpose in the story, instead of saying, here's this black guy. He's here now. Aren't I so diverse? Alright, this next one seems to also be on diversity. Surprise, surprise. Number 74. Want an easy way to become more accustomed to diverse casts? Limit your straight white cis characters to one of each. Those can be three characters for each trait, or pack it all into one character, but only one of each. Okay, so this just creates the opposite problem of now. Okay, at the end of the day, I'm sorry to say this, but it's true. Straight and cisgendered are defaults. All right, those are the default settings when you boot up a human for the first time. Those are the defaults. All right, and so to be like, oh, I don't even care about the white part, because if I'm writing a book, it genuinely does not matter if my character is white or not, because it probably won't come up, except in my story where culture is explored very deeply, but pretty much none of the characters are white. It's not very diverse, but pretty much none of the characters are white. And but to tell people like, oh, you need to add all these special modifiers on your characters, you're basically telling people to make token characters. Because here's the thing, it's not going to come up very often if a character's gay or straight. So if you're telling them, oh, your character cannot be straight, you're going to have to actively tell your audience this character is not straight. And it's just going to lead to a clunky scenario in which you explain that. You've literally told people that the best way to avoid tokenism is to create more token characters. Okay. Number 75. Don't be afraid of failure and backlash. If someone is screaming at you about how a character you made is racist, that is literally free writing advice that someone is just giving you. Look on the bright side of life for a change. No. If someone is screaming at you about how a character you made is racist, that's gonna make me feel, if I actually believed that person, it would make me feel like crap. Be like, oh man, I'm a racist. But more often than not, I'm just not gonna take it seriously. Again, very different from failure and backlash is someone screaming at you about how racist you are. That's not going to change anyone's mind. In fact, that's just going to make them be like, oh, yeah, I guess I'm racist. Okay, number 76. People of color and LGBTA. I didn't put the Q in there. Or the plus. Or the I. People are allowed to just exist. Don't feel like you have to cover bigotry just because they're in the story. In fact, people will be happier if you don't, because having these characters defined by suffering is itself a tired trope. Sure, all right. I guess I can see that, like putting in a black character and having them go through racism just because they're black, and you're like, oh, I have a black character, they need to experience racism, is a bit silly. It's adding things onto your character that don't need to be there. Number 77. I just want my readers, viewers to have fun is an excellent attitude to have when it comes to storytelling. No, an excellent attitude to have towards storytelling is I want to make a good story. I feel like that's a lot more important than, oh, I want them to have fun. It's always the strangest thing to me how often people like this, and by that I mean bad writers, often focus on, oh, I want to make people feel good. I want to make them feel good. No, you should want to be good. Alright. Number 78. As a general rule, slice of life has always been a more popular genre than action-adventure. I highly disagree. We've been writing adventure stories since, like, ancient Greece. I like this one. Dude, trust me. This is true. It's why the box office is typically dominated by slice-of-life films. That was sarcasm for those of you who can't read it. Oh yes, because a story about going through the daily life and major events of a person is more thrilling and interesting than a story of discovery, action, suspense, etc. This one's good. No. One Piece dominates sales in Japan. You were wrong objectively. Tell that to the top grossing movie list. That's more of an absolute falsehood. There's a reason there aren't many slice of life movies. Yeah, this is just wrong. That's just genuinely not true. And again, how is that good writing advice? Because again, I am an aspiring author. I want to make a book. All right, I want to make one of them things. And to tell me that some genre that I'm not good at writing is better than the genre I am writing, or rather, to tell me that another genre is more popular than the genre I'm writing, is not advice in any sense of the word. I'm never, ever going to write slice of life because that's just not what I'm good at. And not only that, it's not what I'm interested in. So in what way is this advice? Okay. Feature creep is a problem in storytelling as well. You don't have to cram every single idea, reference, and homage you can think of into a story. You can save ideas for another time. Okay, this is like the second piece of good advice. D&D alignments are terrible metrics for character design. They're meant as a quick reference for improvisation in a tabletop RPG environment and shouldn't be taken outside that environment. I don't know. What more can you have, honestly? I feel like if you believe in good and evil, then putting that on a scale from lawful to chaotic is a pretty good way of describing things. But I mean, who honestly uses D&D alignments for character design? Who's like, and this character is going to be a chaotic neutral bard? Who out there is doing that? I make characters to I guess fill roles, not to when I write characters, I don't. I mean, I guess I'm saying like, yeah, don't do that, but I don't know who does do that, so it's kind of a strange thing to do. Consistently leaving out the Q, Lily Orchard's bigotry is showing. When writing LGBTA characters, stay as far away from Rocky Horror Picture Show as you possibly can. Some gay people hold it up as a meaningful part of our quote-unquote culture. It is not. It is a misogynistic, I'm going to guess that was meant to say misogynistic nightmare, made by an actual TERF, not a reference guide for anything. So here we have, you've just labeled someone and dismissed them, so that's lovely. Some gay people hold it up as a meaningful part of our culture. It's not. That is a horrible thing to say. I'm not involved in this discussion whatsoever because I've never seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show and I don't care about it. But that's a horrible thing to say. Just to say, like, oh, this isn't a part of our culture. Say, like, oh, you can't take pride in this. You're wrong. That's horrible. The Q. Okay, so you believe queer is a slur, despite the fact that people have been telling me I need to use it these days. Queer as a concept tactily reinforces heteronormativity by casting LGBTA people as inherently strange. In no big deal representation, the word should be avoided. Normalizing LGBTA people and the Q slur are like oil and water and don't go together. The ratio. I want to get into those because that seems like some spicy replies we'll get there. Let me actually, I'm trying to read through this. So, okay, what does this have to do with writing advice? This is just your own personal belief of like, oh, we shouldn't use the word queer because of this thing. That has nothing to do with helping me write my book. It's nonsense. Just absolute nonsense. Oh yeah, I wanted to read the spicy comments on this one. The best thing about this thread is how each take just gets worse and worse and worse. I don't want to watch. I'm never going to watch a video from this person now because I just do not trust anything they say. Oh, I think I saw this hidden reply. It was like, it's basically like, don't erase. Yeah, it was this person. It was like, don't erase who I am, and then she hid the reply. Are queer elders reclaim the word? I guess I fundamentally agree with that. Show me where the concept of normal has ever been used except as an excuse to oppress those who are excluded from it. Yes. Eating people is not normal. I will oppress those who eat people. Some people look queer, Lillian. Anyway, I love... Yeah, so there are people in here who identify as queer, and who are like, you can't tell me what to call myself. Is that an actual thing? Is this an actual... It can't be. Oh, good lord, it is. How is anyone supposed to remember this at this point? LGBTTQQIAAP. I sound like a skipping record when I read that. Queer is a slur as turf rhetoric, and here we have another person just labeling someone else. I don't remember an episode of The Next Generation with a mariachi band. Alright, so, okay. Rape is an unforgivable crime, more so than killing. Killing can potentially be justified in a story without becoming a villain. Rape cannot. Okay, I feel like that's kind of fundamentally understood. But again, you can't tell people what they can and can't do with their characters. For instance, I personally would not like a story where the rapist is redeemed in the end. But at the same time, I'm not going to tell someone not to write that because that's their business. They can write whatever they want, and if people enjoy it, that's up to them, even if I find it creepy and horrible. Sex scenes are never necessary. Neither is writing. Neither is any of this. Do you really think I needed Twilight's Kingdom in 6 minutes? Do you really think that every My Little Pony episode reviewed in 10 words or less is necessary? None of this is necessary. Telling people that something isn't necessary is the worst argument you could ever have. Because, honestly, it could add something. Who knows? Personally, I've never seen one that was, but it could add something. I actually want to see if anyone gave any examples of it in here. Meal scenes are never necessary. You want to include one because you're hungry, then more powerful to you. But any attempt to justify it as important to the story will only get you laughed at. I haven't read Berserk, but who knows? I guess somebody... Okay. As long as it isn't harmful or bigoted, you don't have to justify story decisions made on the basis of self-indulgence. I actually agree with that one, and it goes in direct conflict with this one, so that's amazing. Thank you, this person, for allowing that to see the light of day. Sounds like a personal opinion, not a real tip. That is this thread in a one-sentence description. You know, honestly, I don't even need to read any more, honestly. I mean, Lily is wrong by their own by their own standards, because I don't even need to respond to this by saying like, oh, here's a good scene, because they've already said like, oh, it doesn't matter, so I don't even need to get into that one anymore. Strong characters can still cry and need support from others. Vulnerability is not a character flaw. Okay, so I agree, but you don't know what strong is, because you think strong is viewed inherently in opposition of emotional vulnerability. That's not what a strong character is. A strong character is someone who I can understand, who I can maybe not necessarily relate to, but a strong character is one whose motivations I can dissect. All right. I don't understand why Rey does anything that she does. Okay. I don't understand what makes her, like a good guy. I don't understand why she even wants to be a Jedi. I don't understand why she wants to fight for the Resistance, because I don't understand her. She's not a strong character. However, emotionally and physically, she would overpower Luke Skywalker in a moment before even being trained. That does not make her a strong character. But like I said, I do agree. Vulnerability is not a character flaw. Peak TV is a fancy way of saying addiction-fueled misery porn. What? What? I've heard people use the phrase like peak before, and to say like this is the pinnacle, this is the best that it can get, but that's not writing advice. That's just that's this is media critique advice. That's what this is, and it doesn't even correlate. Addiction-based storytelling relies on serialization, cliffhangers, shocking twists, constantly raised stakes, and an obsession with foreshadowing to get people to watch not because they're enjoying themselves, but because they're stuck on attention high. I agree with this one. It's not writing advice, though. By the end, the viewer is only watching for closure because they've already invested so much and need their fix in order to feel like it was worth it. This is the same business model that soap operas use. An example I would use of this was both from Stephen Moffat, actually. Matt Smith's run in Doctor Who and Sherlock. Both of those shows are very like, oh, there's this big mystery. What's it gonna be? And especially with Doctor Who, every time they answered a question, they would raise two more questions so they can be like, oh, what's gonna happen? And they would do that so that you wouldn't realize how unsatisfying the conclusion to that mystery was. And it's horrible, and I hate it. So I agree with this one. If the sunk cost fallacy didn't exist, shows like Steven Universe and Game of Thrones would have been canceled by season 2. I can't say anything on Game of Thrones because I don't know anything about Game of Thrones except for a lot of the discourse that went on during season 8. But I would agree, yeah, Steven Universe would have been canceled if the sunk cost fallacy didn't exist. I agree with that one. Hardcore fans will tell you that continuity is the most important thing. They're wrong. It's always hard to say what the most important thing in writing a story is. Continuity is very up there, I would say. All right, a lot of people cannot be invested in a story if things just change whenever you want them to. All right, if I was listening to people talking about The Mandalorian, and one of them was saying about, oh, how this thing doesn't work in the timeline. Someone was saying, like, and people can respond to that being like, oh, continuity, it's not that important. And it's like, okay, but what level does it come up to? What if Obi-Wan showed up in The Mandalorian and people are like, wait, isn't this supposed to take place after Return of the Jedi? He's supposed to be dead. You could just be like, continuity isn't the most important thing in the story. It's a nonsense thing. Okay. 90. This is too political is a complaint only made by conservatives when a story acknowledges that non-white and non-straight people exist. The existence of other kinds of people is not political. Ignore these complaints. So I would agree when people say this is too political, they're not phrasing it in the best way. I believe oftentimes what they mean is this is propaganda, which has shown up in a lot of things, like whether or not you agree with the point of the propaganda, you can't ignore that it is still there. I mean, it's really hard for me to get an example, but okay, so if someone said Saturday Night Live is too political these days, I wouldn't agree with the words they say, but I would agree with the sentiment behind those words. And SNL, obviously, has always been quote-unquote political in that it makes fun of political figures. But at the same time, all of the jokes are the same now, where it's just like, haha, Donald Trump, and it gets really boring and stale. So the criticism isn't necessarily that it's too political, but I would agree with the sentiment of what those people are saying. They just need to phrase it better. Also, this virtue signaling of like non-white and non-straight people exist. Like, yes, everyone knows. The Little Mermaid and Cinderella are more feminist than Beauty and the Beast. The Little Mermaid is about a child who doesn't know anything, getting herself in danger because she didn't listen to her father. It happens to turn out well, but in the original tale, she dies because she was a fool. Cinderella doesn't really have a whole lot of agency. Her problems get solved by legitimately a fairy godmother, essentially a deus ex machina. Just shows up and is like, "Oh, I'll dress you up all pretty, and I'll give you this nice carriage, and the mice turn into horses." Actually, it would have been, quote unquote, more feminist if the fairy godmother hadn't shown up, and if she was able to like sneak out to the ball, with the dress that she herself made. Um, More feminist than Beauty and the Beast. I mean, the three of them aren't really feminist, but Beauty and the Beast probably has the best role model for little girls. I mean, essentially, think of what the main character of these stories tells little girls. The Little Mermaid tells little girls, "Oh, completely ignore everything your parents say to you. Chase after this man, even at your own risk. It'll turn out fine." Cinderella says, "Somebody else will come along and solve your problems for you." Beauty and the Beast presents, a strong female character, and I don't mean like physically strong as so many people interpret it these days. I mean a character who, she has solid beliefs. She's a person basically. I can see her existing in real life because she has realistic reactions to things in different, social situations and such. Um, she's highly intelligent, even if the people around her don't understand her, and I would say she's more kind and overall just more of a decent person than the other two. So if that's what you would define as feminist, then you're wrong on this one. Also, what is the writing advice here? That's just I posted my opinion on a thing, and now it's writing advice. Number 92. If you want to know when to change a trans character's pronouns in the narration, doing so at the moment when they realize who they are and admit it to themselves out loud is chef's kiss. Okay, I don't. This is basically telling people I want the same emotional climax in every story because this is the best way to do it. So basically, what this post is saying is that if you. This post is saying this is when you change a trans character's pronouns to get the same emotional impact in every story of this type. That's horrible advice. Number 93. Yeah, we already looked at this one. I already agree with this one. As long as it isn't harmful or bigoted, you don't have to justify story decisions made on the basis of self-indulgence. Does anyone point out the sex scene thing here? You should have started with this one way back at the start of your thread. Would have made so many other of the other tips unnecessary. You mean like boob armor? What about toxic age gaps? I like how bigoted is the qualification, not good writing. That's another thing. Now that I'm looking at this, harmful or bigoted, that doesn't. I'm going to guess in this person's mind, it doesn't contradict the earlier points because those are harmful and bigoted. Because I can change those words to mean whatever I want. Vampires and werewolves are not inherently LGBT coded, and doing so is an example of othering. They work better as metaphors for aristocracy and predators, respectively, than as the underclass. What are you saying? Like, okay, so there are, I want to say, over 3 million words in the English language, and I have never seen someone put them together in this way, where it's like looking at some sort of Lovecraftian beast. This sentence is. It's strange. I'm gonna skip past that one. I legitimately do not understand it. Some of the best stories ever made were written as an act of spite. You have what, like 140 characters on Twitter, and you used hardly any of them. Give me some examples, woman. I think. Yes, I'm going to spite you by writing an awesome story with everything you think is evil. Don't be a bigot unless your story is good. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with this, but I want some examples. Because when I look at this, I'm thinking I can't imagine somebody making something extraordinarily good out of spite, like just that started as an act of like hatred and not skepticism, but cynicism. Like, I don't know, just doesn't sound true. I would like some sources on that though. Number 96. Any system of government, with the exception of fascism, because of course, you have to talk about fascism, can exist in positive or negative context. Monarchies are not always inherently evil, and democracies are not always inherently good. See USA. Write accordingly. So yes, I would agree. Democracies are not always inherently good. The U.S. is not a democracy. What I would use as an example is the same thing that Socrates hated: the democracy of ancient Greece. Um, yeah, obviously, monarchies aren't always inherently evil. Democracies aren't always inherently good. Obviously, but if I'm writing a story about an evil democracy or an evil monarch, I'm sorry, I meant to say evil monarchy. I don't even know how an evil democracy would work. It would just be everyone's evil and they're all voting for evil things. But if I'm writing a story about an evil monarchy, it's going to present the monarchy as evil. And I personally believe that monarchy will always end up being corrupt because you'll get people in power who don't deserve that power. I mean, to be fair, in any system that gives people power, the people in power will generally not deserve that power. Uh, but I just love the with the exception of fascism and CUSA. You've got to let them know, like, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. Uh, Number 97. Lesbian still on good terms with ex-boyfriend from before coming out is a really cute friendship trope, and vice versa. Okay, I don't see how that's a writing tip. That's just a trope you like. Okay. Number 98. The only real difference between an extremely close platonic relationship, love how you gotta preface that with extremely close to make your point make sense, and a romantic relationship is what the people involved choose to call it. Best friends are not something that should ever be prefixed with the word just. I mean, I would agree with that last part. It's kind of like, we're just best friends, I guess. Isn't that a song? I don't know. I'm so tired at this point. Um, but regardless, no. Platonic relationships and romantic relationships are very different. No matter how close the platonic relationship is, there is a huge gap there. And I can't even really go into it, but I should hope it's self-evident and maybe someone else can explain it better than I can, but I don't know. Anyway. Number 99. Normalize friends saying I love you to each other. No. First off, if you're talking about in real life, sure, I guess. Sure. Like, yeah, friends should be able to say I love you to each other, but in writing, it doesn't represent real life. If you're trying, I mean, my idea with writing is you're trying to immerse people into a world as much as possible, and it's not very immersive when they're not acting like real people. And in real life, most men don't say I love you to each other. Not commonly, at least. I think um, when one of my cousins lost his father, I had a drink with him and I said I love you, man, just to let him know, like I'm here for you in like a serious moment. And even then, like you put the man on the end of there to let you know, like, oh, I'm not being weird about it. But it's not a common thing that people say. Number 100. I actually do highly agree with if you write a 100 tweet long thread of writing advice, you are a huge loser with way too much free time on your hands. Get back to work and do something productive with your time. That is actually very good writing advice. Um, Very good. At least you're self aware. Uh, yeah. 101. Tips and rules are two different words. This is actually the worst one for me. This utter backtracking of like, oh no, I'm just these aren't hard rules. These are just tips. Which actually I saw one there. I didn't click on it, but it said tips imply usefulness. Highly agree with that one. Tips imply usefulness. And also, let's go back to this one. Uh, this person says that this philosophy is a stupid philosophy to have. it's a stupid philosophy to have. Oh, but it's just, you know, tips and rules. They're two different things. They're two different things. And oh man, it's so frustrating to me how people just say the stupidest things and then just go like, oh, come on, guys. I wasn't being that serious about it. It was just, you know, it's just my opinion. I just figured I'd put my word out there. It's, oh man, oh, it's just, you know, it's not too serious. There's some good points in here though. There's some good responses to this tweet. I would recommend going through them. There's some really funny things in here. What? No, this isn't a real thing. I saw a couple things talking about like, okay, yeah, there it is. Guess there's a reason why your writing isn't very successful. I have no idea who this person is. This can't be real, can it? No. No. Wait, no. No, you don't write yourself into your comic. I need to read this. I need to read this now. What on earth? What on earth? The other... What? What's... What is... Okay, first off, this is... I hesitate to use the phrase bad art, but this is bad art. You can actually tell it's very inspired by My Little Pony. Because it's bad. No, I'm kidding. Oh, this person, this artist is criticizing other people on not knowing how boobs work. Look at that. They're uneven. Look at this. What? Oh man. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go down this whole rabbit hole. That was Lily Orchard's awful thread on writing advice. I hope that for someone out there, someone read through this thread and the responses to the tweet taught them more than the tweet, because this is a really bad thread, and if you're a writer, take none of these tips seriously. That's going to be it from me. I promise I will get right back to working on that thing I was working on after I stretch a little bit, because I've been like reading through this thread for nearly 3 hours now, and it's bad. Anyway, goodbye.